Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents The Greatest Raid of All, Operation Chariot, and the mission to destroy the Normandie dock at St Nazaire, by C. E. Lucas Phillips. Narrated by Stewart Crank. Publisher's note: this audiobook may refer to visual elements included in the print and e-book editions of the book. Author's note: having been associated with practically all combined operations, from two-man raids to the planning for Normandy, I have no hesitation in saying that the finest and most profitable of the lot was your raid on St Nazaire. Thus, Lord Louis Mountbatten, as he then was, wrote to Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman after Newman's release from captivity in 1945. Yet, of the many exploits of the war, of which this was perhaps the most daring and brilliant of all, few have received so little attention from the investigator. Indeed, no account, official or otherwise, has yet been published, which is complete and wholly accurate, even the official casualty numbers being at fault. Captain Robert Ryder's little book, The Attack on St Nazaire, gives an excellent short narrative and still better appreciation, but it is surprising that no full-dress account has yet been written. The book, now presented, accordingly, is an attempt to fill the gap, and it will have failed in its purpose if it does not now show that the St Nazaire Raid shines with a lustre equal to that of the most brilliant of any small exploit of warfare. Small in numbers, but large in achievement. For the gallant 600 who sailed up the Loire on that cloudy March night in 1942, with guns to the right and left and ahead of them, achieved a purpose out of all proportion to their small number, and of an extent that was not fully realized until after the war was over. It would be inappropriate to repeat here the comparison made with Zeebrugge in the main text, but it is very apt to quote the verdict of Admiral of the Fleet Sir Charles Forbes in his introduction to Captain Ryder's book. Without in any way wishing to belittle Zeebrugge, wrote Sir Charles, one should now talk of St Nazaire instead. These things will appear. On the other hand, no attempt has been made to minimize the less satisfactory features, such as the reluctance of the Admiralty to provide the essential ships, the unhappy collapse of the bombing support program, the loss of command of the battle through failure of wireless communications, and the severe, indeed the heartbreaking, losses among the vulnerable motor launchers. As far as possible, this book has been written entirely from original evidence, British, German, and French. No existing account has been taken for granted. In this pursuit, I've received generous help from Amphibious Warfare Headquarters and from Lieutenant Commander P.K. Kemp and Commander M.G. Saunders, particularly for German records, of the historical section of the Admiralty. The French Embassy has also courteously assisted, and the librarian of the Imperial War Museum has expertly excavated in her rich soil. In addition to a large store of original documents, I have received personal narratives from 53 British and 11 German officers and men who participated in the planning or execution of the raid, and in most instances, these informants have seen and concurred in those portions of the manuscript that concerned them. To all these informants, many of whom have put up with much cross-examination, I am very much indebted. For reasons of length, I have been most regretfully obliged to omit a large wealth of detail, particularly regarding the river battle, the escapes, and the preliminary planning, with which they have so generously supplied me. I cannot possibly enumerate, as I should like, all these contributors to the store of information, but for specially valuable or continuous help at many stages, I owe particular thanks to Admiral of the Fleet, the Earl Mountbatten of Burma, Lieutenant Colonel S. W. Chant, OBE MC, who has been a particularly valuable and resourceful aid in the hunt for information, Captain S. H. Beatty, RC RN, Major R. K. Montgomery, MC RN, Dr. P. J. C. Dark, Major W. O. Copland, DSO. Mr. R.O.C. Swain, MC. Commander E. A. Burt, DSC. Mr. R.C. M.V. Wynne, DSC. Commander D.M.C. Curtis, DSC. Mr. T.W. Boyd, DSO. Mr. G.R. Wheeler, M.M. Major Anthony Terry, MC. Mr. John Costa, DSC. And Mr. I.L. McLagan. For the planning and preparation, I have been critically guided by Vice Admiral J. Hughes Hallett, CB DSO MP, Major General J. C. Hayden, CB OBE DSO, Colonel R. D. Q. Enriquez, CBE, and Wing Commander the Marquess de Casa Mori, as well as by Earl Mountbatten himself. Mr. H. E. Hewitt, Secretary of the St Nazaire Society, aptly described by Earl Mountbatten as the most exclusive society in the world, has helped me to make contact with a great number of the gallant charioteers in many parts of the world. Among German informants, I am chiefly indebted to Captain Serzi Sisi Mecker, Herr Ido Diekmann, Dr. Lothar Bergener, Fregattenkapitän F.K. Paul, Captain Serzi Moritz Schmidt, and Dr. Herbert Zoller. Above all, however, I am in debt to Captain R.E.D. Ryder, V.C., and Lieutenant Colonel A.C. Newman, V.C. OBE TD-DL, for their continuous guidance at all stages, and for their constructive criticisms of my draft manuscript throughout. Without their help, the story of St Nazaire could not have been told. From this mass of detailed evidence, official and personal, often contradictory, often incomplete or uncertain, I have done my best to give a true representation of the facts, weighing the evidence in the scales of judgment as best one can. In personal and minor detail, however, some points still remain indecisive, for in all the crowded and stirring events of a close action, it is not always easy for the participants themselves to be entirely certain of what has occurred. If some small errors have crept in from such causes, this narrative will nonetheless, I hope, stand as witness to an aggregation of deeds of individual heroism that has seldom been excelled. The title of the book is taken from Hilary St. George Saunders, historian of the Commandos, in his book, The Green Beret. The ranks throughout are those appropriate to the time. Forward. By Admiral of the Fleet, the Earl Mountbatten, of Burma, KG. Of all the operations with which I was concerned in the late war, the successful raid on the battleship dock at St Nazaire is perhaps the one I am most proud to have been associated with. It was one of those actions which can only be attempted precisely because it must appear, to the enemy, to be absolutely impossible to undertake, and for this reason alone it required courage and determination of a quite unusual order to carry out. What is more, this complicated operation had been planned in greatest detail, and once the forces were committed, each individual small ship and each little group of soldiers had to fight it out, guided by orders received at home, but entirely in the light of their own initiative. I know of no other case in naval or military annals of such effective damage being inflicted so swiftly, with such economy of force. For in less than half an hour from the moment the Cambeltown rammed, all the Commandos' chief demolition objectives were successfully achieved. This brilliant attack was carried out at night, under a vicious enemy fire, by a mere handful of men, who achieved, with certainty and precision, what the heaviest bombing raid or naval bombardment might well have failed to do. The great Normandie dock was put out of action, and was made useless to every kind of ship, and, indeed, was to remain unusable for the next 10 years or so. The Germans were prevented from being able to use the only dock on the Atlantic seaboard to which their great battleship, Tirpitz, could go, to repair damage sustained in raiding the Atlantic. In fact, this effectively prevented them from operating her against our convoy routes altogether. Thus, the main object of the raid was brilliantly achieved. No fewer than 5 VCs were won at St Nazaire, out of a total force of 611, surely by far the highest proportion of VCs ever awarded for a single operation, and this is the measure of the heroism of all who took part in that magnificent enterprise. 1. What the Frenchmen saw. 40 minutes before midnight, on the 27th of March, 1942, while a thunderstorm was sounding to the north and east, and lightning flashed upon a clouded sky, the cry of the air raid sirens roused from their sleep the citizens of the French port of St Nazaire. They roused also the German garrison, who held so tight a grip on a port vital to the Nazi purpose. The crews of anti-aircraft guns and searchlights took post. Another RAF raid was imminent. A few minutes later, as the German radar station at Le Croisier picked up the leading bombers, the long, chill fingers of the searchlights began to probe the sky. Very soon, every window in the town was shaking as the German guns opened fire in a cannonade more violent than any heard before, and fountains of red and green tracer were shooting up into the vault, silencing the distant thunder and outshining the lightning of the sky. The same spectacle, vivid as distant fireworks in the wide night, was seen from far out to sea by a flotilla of little British ships, which, unknown to either French or Germans, was moving steadily in upon a mission that was soon to shake the enemy defences to their foundation, and to bring to the patriot French a surge of hope and a bitter trial. To the ears of the French and Germans, as well as to those of the little force at sea, there came from above the clouds, mingled with the hum of German fighter aircraft, the deep drone of heavy bombers from the island fortress of Britain, 250 miles away. They came mainly from the northwest, but some from the east, dipping into the clouds as their rear gunners detected the German fighters, climbing out again when ice formed upon their wings. Yet no hurricane of bombs resulted. Indeed, only 4 aircraft released their missiles, one at a time and at long intervals. But a fire was started in the Forge de l'Ouest, hard by the Great Dock. On the ground, men listened in some puzzlement as the Whitleys circled and manoeuvred without bombing. Capitaine Serzi Mecca, commanding the German 22nd Naval Flak Brigade, which manned the anti-aircraft guns, listening at his headquarters at St Mark, and noting the extraordinary manoeuvres of the British aircraft on his radar screen, became more and more suspicious that these manoeuvres were merely a blind for some devilry not yet apparent, and he communicated his suspicions to all command posts of the German Army, Navy, and Air Force. Shortly, however, the raiding aircraft one by one turned away, their engines fading to a whisper in the night, though from time to time others could faintly be heard very high up above the clouds. No object whatever seemed to have been achieved, except that the fire in the Forge de l'Ouest continued to burn fiercely. The guns ceased fire, the searchlights were switched off, and an uneasy quiet settled upon the town and the broad estuary. Neither French nor Germans knew that this strange behaviour of the British was mainly due to humanitarian reasons, for the thunderclouds so obscured the pilots' vision that they were unable to make out with certainty the German-occupied docks, which were their objective, and, rather than bring avoidable peril to French civilians, they abandoned their mission, as they had been told to do, with results of which we shall presently be the spectators. Thus, Frenchmen and Germans alike listened expectantly for the all-clear to permit them to relax and sleep again. The darkened town, the docks, and the railway yards lay still and silent under the quilted clouds. Yet no all-clear sounded. Gradually, with an irony that none could see, the clouds that had impeded the bombers cleared away at their lower levels, and a full moon, the moon that would have guided them surely to their mark, shone through the higher nimbus, but shone too late upon the naked roofs, upon the false peacefulness of the wide estuary, and upon the monstrous concrete kennels where lurked the U-boats of the German 7th and 6th submarine flotillas. Still, no all clear. No one saw a German patrol boat winking an urgent sign of alarm away at the mouth of the river. The patient Nazarians, in their cellars and shelters, looked inquiringly at each other. Those who had their beds below turned back to sleep. The Germans, who had no action stations, and the hands from the German ships in harbour, in their separate shelters, fidgeted to return to their bunks and billets. The maintenance hands of the submarines loitered secure within the massive protection of their concrete roof. But the men who manned the guns and searchlights remained at their posts, maintaining, in accordance with new orders that they had received from Mecca, a posture of readiness to react instantly to the totally unexpected events that were to follow. At 1:30 in the morning of the 28th, some dwellers in the moonlit boulevard Wilson, which runs along the seafront southwestwards from the docks, and in which the German Hafenkommandant had his headquarters, beheld, to their astonishment, what appeared to be 2 torpedo boats, and a dozen motor launches riding up the estuary, illuminated from both banks of the river by a concentration of searchlights that flung their beams not upwards as they were accustomed to do, but horizontally upon the sea. They saw a German Speerbrecher moored in the roads, winking an urgent signal lamp to the advancing flotilla, and, apparently receiving no answer, let fly the strikers of her quick-firing guns. They saw the German naval troops, who were in their air raid shelters, run out from them to fetch their weapons, lie down in the boulevard, and open fire with small arms and machine guns upon the flotilla, which vigorously replied. Thus, without warning of sirens, the Nazarians heard the artillery break out again, on all hands, at first intermittently, hesitantly, and with uncertain note. Then, after a few minutes, in a violent crescendo. A sudden tumult burst. The blast of guns was now accompanied by the new, more menacing sound of shells bursting at ground level, very close at hand. To this was quickly added the sharp rattle of machine guns. Frenchmen who had served their time with the colours could not fail to interpret the notes of this violent orchestra. No air raid, this. St Nazaire was being assaulted from the sea. The listening French, excitement beginning to mount in their hearts, then heard great explosions, as of mines or very heavy charges, shake the house. Debris of all sorts spattered down in the streets and on the roofs. Those who could look safely from their windows, or come cautiously to their doors, saw to their astonishment the flotilla of motor launches, in double column of line ahead, great fins of water splaying out from their bows as they moved at speed, swing into a dazzling concentration of searchlights in the harbour mouth, through which the streams of coloured tracer, like shuttles in an infernal loom, darted in all directions. To this concentration of light under the dim, cold moon was added a series of fierce yellow-tongued conflagrations, as, one after another, the motor launches, their naked petrol tanks hit, burst into flames with violent explosions. The sea itself was on fire, as the spilled petrol spread across the surface, and clouds of black smoke drifted across the pool of light. The very sky was alight with these conflagrations, and that of the Forge de l'Ouest continued to rage. For about an hour, the Nazarians listened to this violent clamour. The confusion was total. It then gradually assumed a somewhat different note, as, one by one, a few of the launches, so very few, turned their bows to the open sea, and, at full speed, once more ran the gauntlet of the German batteries. Last seen of all, to those who could watch, was that of a lone gunboat, every gun and light concentrated upon her in a tumult of gun flashes, darting tracers, and shell fire, bursting into fountains of water, miraculously escaping, surely under the hand of Providence, through a cloud of her own white smoke. The gunfire slackened, limited to that of small, quick-firing pieces. German lorries were heard driving at speed through the streets of the town, laden with troops, and presently the dominant sounds were those of machine guns and rifles and the sharp bursts of hand grenades. Armoured cars tore through the streets. An infantry battle was plainly being fought. Was this, Frenchmen asked one another, the beginning at last of the counter-invasion by their allies. There were many whose hearts beat high. There were several, it is said, whose thoughts turned to the few hidden arms they possessed, ready to join in the fight for deliverance. Before daylight, all gunfire ceased, but desultory rifle fire was heard in the streets of the town itself. It must, then, be the Tommies. A German motorcycle combination, its machine gunner spitting fire at random, was bowled over by counterfire from an unseen hand. Two figures in the old familiar khaki hammered at the front door of a little house and said in garbled French, "Show us the way through to the back." They passed through, climbed a wall, and were gone. Elsewhere, the poultry were wakened to a frightened clamour as men dropped astonishingly into their run. At another house, a tall, moustached figure in the kilt asked for water for the wounded. Other shadowy figures moved from house to house. Men bleeding from wounds sought shelter in cellars and outhouses. The morning brought confusion and an atmosphere of terror. There was still a little spasmodic shooting, and the Germans, their garrison heavily reinforced, were in a state of high nervous tension. They, too, thought that an invasion was being attempted, and suspected that the patriot French would rise in support of it. They picketed every road junction in the town, firing at shadows and at each other. A smell, as of exhausted fires, came from the docks. A convoy of German ambulances swept in and took away a stream of wounded. The Nazarians, of course, were completely in the dark, and the Germans themselves, angry, bewildered, and their nervousness soon to be amply justified, almost as much so. Was this really the prelude to invasion? If not, what had been the objective of the British? Sadly, the French, as they attempted to go about their business, saw small parties of British soldiers and sailors, many of them very severely wounded, being rounded up one by one and bundled into lorries, dishevelled, bleeding, limping, supporting one another, their badges and rank marks torn from them by the Germans, but still looking proud, even gay. From other points along the coast, more parties of British sailors and soldiers, escaping by miracles from the petrol flames of their sunken craft, were brought in, barefoot, and, except only for a blanket, naked. The bodies of others, dead from gunshots, or drowned, or charred from the fierce flames of petrol fires, were gathered up from the beaches, or from the sullen waters of the Loire. But French workmen who went back to their tasks in the docks saw also another picture. They saw a British destroyer rammed firm and deep in the gate of the enormous dry dock, that dock which was the largest in the world, and which would accommodate any battleship of the world's navies. They saw powerhouses wrecked and burning, and in the forenoon a mighty explosion shook the town, as the destroyer blew up. For the British Commandos of the Special Service Brigade, and for their naval comrades in arms, this was the end of Operation Chariot, and the end of the war, save for those few who astonishingly made good their escapes. But for the French of St Nazaire, as one mysterious explosion followed another long after the raid was over, it was the beginning of 3 days of terror and of death, when the delayed action results of this most daring of raids stampeded the angry and bewildered Germans, contrary to their disciplined habits, into a paroxysm of indiscriminate shooting, in which they shot down not only innocent French men and women, but also their own comrades. Of all these things we shall hear in due place, and hear also how, in this welter of blood and flames, a blow was struck for the Allied cause that immediately altered the course of naval strategy to its advantage. It was a blow far more difficult to deliver, at least equally dangerous, far more successful and deserving even more renown than the famous Zeebrugge raid in 1918, so closely comparable in purpose. For the Zeebrugge raid, carried out against a port only 80 miles away, and on the open seaboard, with 3 times the number of men, was tactically less difficult, and strategically not a success, in spite of all its lustrous heroism, since the submarine base was blocked for only 24 hours, whereas the Normandie dock at St Nazaire was blocked for 10 years. Gradually, as the facts disclosed themselves in the next few days to the eyes of the RAF cameras and to the ears of the keenest of intelligence services, the gallant exploit of Ryder and Newman and their companions stood revealed, not as a mere nuisance raid, not as just another sally by a beleaguered garrison, but, in the words of Sir Winston Churchill, as a deed of glory intimately involved in high strategy. Not less memorable were the words spoken to the survivors of the gallant band of Operation Chariot by the French Prime Minister 5 years later, with that warm and generous eloquence for which Frenchmen have such a gift. "You," said M. Ramadier, "were the first to bring us hope." Except when otherwise stated. The quotations in this chapter are from an official report from the Mayor of St Nazaire to the Minister of Justice in November 1944. 2. The Black Hour. Except that it is French, St Nazaire does not differ greatly from other dockyard towns. The cooking is better than on Tyneside or the Clyde, but not the sanitation. Unlike La Baule, the fashionable watering place 8 miles to the westward, it is a town garbed for the greater part in tones of sombre grey. No fashionable hotels here earn multiple stars in the traveller's guidebook. No smart shops tempt the wealthy client. Trams jangle along its streets, and of its 50,000 inhabitants, the most important element is that which works daily in the great docks. The maps and photographs show that there are in fact 2 towns. There is the old town, of narrow streets and mainly small houses, lying within the compass of the dockland itself, and constituting a serious threat to the advance of Newman's men. Here was the original St Nazaire, when it was no more than a little fishing village before the coming of the big ships. To the westward of the old town lies the much larger, relatively modern town of formal rectangular layout, built from the prosperity of the docks, where we shall see the combined commandos making their bold attempt to break through the gathering German forces. Along the riverfront stretch the great docks and shipbuilding yards, products of the 19th century, when the old inland port of Nantes, some 35 miles up the Loire, became unsuitable for the bigger and still bigger ships of the age of steam. All around lies a scene of flat monotony and utilitarian uses, and inland of the town there stretches a great marsh of some 30 square miles, along the fringes of which Corporal Wheeler and Lance Corporal Sims were to wander in the darkness and bewilderment at the start of their astonishing escape from German clutches. As we open the files of the sombre days of January 1942, and read the records of events that govern the lives of nearly all the world, it is to this busy but unpretentious town that we first turn our gaze. Here there was no whisper or omen of this great event to come. An alien discipline imposed order and obedience. No patriot movement had yet shown its head. For, to St Nazaire, as a seaport town, the fall of France in 1940 had brought the bitterness of enemy occupation. The Germans held it firmly in their grasp, and the great docks were conscripted to their warlike needs under the Admiral Superintendent of the Dockyard, Vice Admiral von Trotha, according to most accounts. Mecca thinks it was then Vice Admiral Rotha. At the various headquarters, the swastika flew for all to see, and from the jackstaff to every German ship in harbour hung the emblem of the Black Cross. The stamping sentries, the guns along the sea's fringe, and the edicts in public places bore witness to a conqueror's hold. For to Germany, still at war with the British peoples, the only combatants of those involved in the hurricane of events of 1940 whom she had failed to conquer, but now freshly at war with America also, the port of St Nazaire was of great importance, not only in a material sense, but also strategically. Standing on the north bank of the estuary of the great river Loire, which at this point is about a mile wide, St Nazaire lies 6 miles back from the open waters of the Bay of Biscay. This wide expanse of water is throughout of shallow depth, and patterned with an archipelago of dangerous mudbanks, except for a single deep water channel, known as the Charpentier's Channel, which runs close to its westward shore, and immediately under the muzzles of a belt of guns.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?